Hello and welcome back. It is part two of the fight breakdown for the formal debate of Sargon of Akkad versus Christy Winters. I have my part one linked in the description below. Please start there, read, listen through, be engaged, follow the course of the debate. There's many points I have made in there that not only deconstruct the arguments as they were presented by both Ms. Winters and Mr. Benjamin, but also how you can pick up on particular elements of the debate stylings to utilize for your own applications down the line. At this point here, we are starting at this video where Ms. Winters has finished her first rebuttal, 5-minute rebuttal, and we are entering Mr. Benjamin's, Sargon of Akkad's, first 5-minute rebuttal. Quick recap of what's going on here. Ms. Winters is arguing for the affirmative that feminism is good for the world. Sargon of Akkad is arguing for the negative. Ms. Winters has laid out an argument that is, in essence, look at all the great work that feminism has done throughout the years in the West. We can continue that tradition in places that do not provide those benefits and breakthroughs for women in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, in South America. She also has pointed out that feminism was, in essence, on the forefront of most of our identifications of missing rights for very particular individuals, and through intersectionality has developed a more robust system to more rapidly identify issues within minority communities. Mr. Benjamin, on the other hand, has not done nearly as well as laying out his argument. In fact, in his opening salvo, where he was given 10 minutes, he merely used 6 minutes of his time. Not only in that 6 minutes did he not reference the topic directly until the last sentence, he focused, although very well with a strong internal consistency, the argument around how academia, being the fueling source for feminist research, has been shown to be extremely fallible, very broken, and in fact producing not only invalid studies, but unreliable studies. The data can be entirely thrown out. So he's gone through this argument. He's shown that, in essence, although loosely, and I wish he could have done a better job of this, that academia has not done very well in presenting strong evidence for why the feminist points that we hear repeated time and again are legitimate grievances. Ms. Winters, in her first rebuttal here, decided to turn around and more or less mock Sargon of Akkad, saying, you're not paying attention, you are not doing very well, you're just giving me a list of complaints, the ivory tower is your enemy, yada, yada, yada. Let us now engage for the rest of this debate. Hopefully I can get this done in not too long and in an entertaining and educational manner for the rest of you. Please finish your final points here as we find the exact spot where we left off.
Improving the lives of men and women. I think the answer really does, I think I'm making a better case here for activism in the world, not just looking at the ivory tower and how people talk about it in published journals. And with that, I'll yield the remainder of my 40 seconds back to the moderators.
Again, picking up on that there, that's a good point that she's made in. She's identified the central argument that Mr. Benjamin has presented thus far. Sargon has not done a very good job of tying himself to the topic at hand, and instead is focused on that quote-unquote ivory tower. So by her targeting that, she's going after a central point. And by targeting your opponent's central point, not only do you appear to be more engaged and more grounded in your debate, but it also gives the opportunity for the rest of the audience to see that, hey, there's actually a weakness here. There's a legitimate weakness of this guy's point. It doesn't matter if you're a feminist or anti-feminist listening to this, know that the presentation by Ms. Winters here is vital in a debate setting. You have to keep your focus almost exclusively on your opponent's central point. If your opponent doesn't use his allotted time entirely, and within his allotted time focuses on only one subset of the myriad of issues which are available to him, it results in your argument being extremely vulnerable to being knocked down rapidly.
All right. Thank you very much, Christy. Carl, you may begin your 5-minute rebuttal.
Just because something is feminist doesn't mean it's not credible. It's because it's biased, politically driven social science that it's not credible.
There we go. That's something that was missing in his first salvo, where he ought to have said that as part of the overarching theme of the problems within academia, to which he didn't. Sargon is not trying to attack feminists here. He's not trying to go after particular feminists. What he's trying to show, however, is that feminism as an ideology, as it operates within the West, at least, is not equipped to deal with the issues at hand because it makes up issues with poor academic research, and that it doesn't have the actual teeth to engage in the more significant issues which are seen in areas outside of the West.
But anyway, I want to talk about why the patriarchy allows women to have rights. Western feminists don't talk about the actual rape cultures going on in patriarchies, that they actually don't allow women rights and institutionally oppress them with laws specifically against women. Instead, feminists convince themselves they live under a patriarchy by redefining the term. No longer does patriarchy mean that women are the property of their fathers and husbands. Now it represents some omnipresent force that can never accurately be pinpointed but merely hinted at in an infinite number of subtle and coincidentally minor inconveniences for the feminist in question.
Patriarchy. 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 Are you familiar with this word? I've made a joke video about it. In fact, if you go back in the produced videos I have done. In fact, this is a legitimate point being levied here, one that ought to have belonged in the original opening statement. The rebuttal seems very strange why he's just continuing his opening statement here, which in essence he is. This is all belonging to the very 10 minutes that he was allotted to begin with. Why is academia producing bad research? Why do feminists use bad research to justify their grievances with the world? Oh, and patriarchy theory, which is central to all of that research and all of the activism you see coming out of the university realm, is flawed deeply. That is opening statement stuff. What is he rebuking here? What of not only her opening statement, but her first rebuttal is he addressing at this point? Again, he seems to be just on autopilot for the most part.
Western feminists redefine another hyperbolic word to describe the effect of this phallocentric conspiracy theory: oppression. When the patriarchy enforces gender binary by presenting girls' toys in pink and boys' toys in blue, our feminist considers this a form of oppression because other people accept this and might even hold an opinion on the subject. This leads to first world feminists making media from the comfort of their warm, dry, plush rooms, wearing makeup and smiling at the camera while surrounded by luxury to make the ridiculous claim that they are being oppressed because sometimes they have to do something.
He's starting to get to a central argument here that he could effectively levy as to why feminism is not a force for good in the world. The topic is too broad, and like I said in my first video, the goal is to massage the topic down to a level where you can target it by posing a unique question, a derivative of the topic itself, and decimate it, or turn it into an absolute paragon of the point. Here, we're just starting to see that now. It still belongs to an opening statement, but we're just starting to see him scratch the surface of the underlying argument he's trying to make.
Orchestrated by an invisible force whose sole purpose for existence is to make their life slightly less easy than it could have been. Western feminists have the gall to redefine a word that describes the result of genuine systems of discrimination and subjugation, and then appropriate that word to describe their everyday annoyances. This is why people hate feminism. It's for whiny, entitled, lazy first world women. But the redefinition of words doesn't stop there. Next is sexism, usually understood to mean prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex. Well, thinks our first world feminist. I certainly can't claim that sexism is the reason that my laziness and entitlement haven't somehow landed me a job at a Fortune 500 company. However, if a feminist redefines sexism to mean systems of the world in which I live are designed to prevent me from achieving the job I have, through the patriarchal mechanism of high standards, then I can nag my way into positions of power by finding a company with people who are obviously not sexist and then accuse them of sexism or worse, attacking them through their own good intentions and, most importantly, saving the feminist from doing anything approaching hard work. Hashtag believe women.
So his focus here is entirely around the Western feminist. Not only the Western feminist, but the Western comfortable, middle-class, educated feminist. This increasingly smaller group of women which exists that seem to perpetuate the larger undulations of the movement, that back and forth, in essence, the peristalsis of the academic shit being moved out through the collective colons of the media outlets. The idea that you can phrase an argument in this way is fun. It's actually somewhat comical. It's entertainment to just point out these feminists. In fact, most of you who will know Sargon of Akkad know that that's, in essence, a lot of what his content is derived from, is identifying these problematic or problem glasses wearing, semi-educated, semi-literate YouTubers or media outlet personalities that go off to no end on these topics of how women are somehow oppressed or hurt. We see these believe women hashtags for the events that we got out of the Jian Ghomeshi trial, where, for those of you who don't know, a guy committed some interesting sexual acts with some women who then later decided to say it was rape, colluded with one another. The collusion was shown by the defense, and the judge effectively said, you know, if you're going to lie about these events, you're going to harm women who have legitimate rape. And the media decided to report the acquittal of Jian Ghomeshi as being proof, the feminist media, that proof that the judicial system is inherently misogynistic and out to hurt women. Those are the women who go out of their way, those are the feminists who go out of their way to tweet this kind of stuff. But this is a small subset. And this is not showing us yet. It's showing us that it's entertaining and it's funny and this is happening. But we're waiting as an audience here to link. Okay, well, does that mean feminism is bad? So you have some bad actors within it, but does that mean the whole movement, the ideology, and the methodologies from it are inherently bad?
But more than a vehicle for feminists to con their way into careers for which they are underqualified, the redefinition of sexism has opened the door to unbridled and often repulsive man-hatred. This is achieved by the use of the childish method of adding up the total number of men and total number of women in the workplace, finding that more men work than women, and then deciding that this is because men have set up a system to oppress women because in the highest paying vocations the majority are male. By this logic, women as a class are oppressed by all men all through history and into the modern day, which is why the wage gap myth won't die. It doesn't matter that men are working longer and harder for their money. In aggregate, they earn more than women, and therefore there are feminists demanding reparations. Hashtag give your money to women.
Another point. Like his opening argument, which this, again, should have been hinged to, he has an internally consistent argument pointing out that there are some bad actors within feminism that happen to shake their way to the front and forefront of the feminist movement and then proclaim some profound issues affecting society, whether it's the wage gap, debunked wage gap, whether it's the debunked rape statistics, whether it's events of persecution based upon body integrity rights, perceived body integrity rights, and a variety of other topics. The nuggets of information there are good and they're well linked together, but it's still a balloon floating away. It's not tied to anything proper yet. We haven't seen that whole argument. So while it appears that those points are good, and those of us who understand the content, who understand the greater context of the debate, who may not be neutral entering this debate, can understand how that links up and why that is so supportive of his argument here. Sargon did not prepare in a manner that says he's dealing with people who are wholly ignorant on the topic, who know nothing about it, and who, if on any other day were asked this question, would say, maybe, I don't know, but show me either way. And you sit down and you listen to this and you kind of go, well, I don't see what that has to do with the other things that Ms. Winters was saying. He's not cross-examining. He's not rebutting. He's not setting anything up that is weakening Ms. Winters' argument yet. He hasn't offered anything in that variety in his first
Of
cross-examination.
course, this synchronizes wonderfully with the redefinition of sexism. So now not only are all men oppressing all women using sexist institutionalized power, but women can't even be sexist in return. So no matter how openly bigoted and hateful they are towards men, it is totally justified because of their redefinition of these words. Feminism is Orwell's nightmare come to life, with a bright smile, rainbow hair, and a jingle in the background, by people so pathologically entitled they campaign against other people's human rights. And let's not forget, when we abandon the inverse doublespeak of the feminist lexicon and return to the standard English definitions, the only women these terms apply to are the ones feminists are busy erasing, so they can pollute the media with their own petty and selfish needs. Hashtag manspreading, mansplaining, mansplaining, manshaming, fucking man-hating.
And so concludes his first rebut. What's interesting about that is he did very well to have an internally consistent argument that, again, and guess what? He had 5 minutes to do it. That took him a total of 4 minutes and 20 seconds to do. So he could have used those 4 minutes and 20 seconds and actually, a little tweaking, fit it into his 5-minute opening. That's what we have from him so far. The man-slapping, man-hating, man-shaming, man-fucking-hating part of it is a fair point, internally consistent with the rest of the points he made. However, it has nothing to do with the topic at hand yet. Well, it might, well, we can divine that it is. He did not link it towards it. And by failing to link it towards it, we, as the audience, are left with this strange floating bit of information unattached to any central point that Ms. Winters could just ignore, let float away, and continue to attack whatever type of points he's put up there. I don't even know if this is an attempted strategy to propose ghost points for her to attack so that when you're left, you can actually engage with your final closing statement on some crucial elements within it. But it's not a strong one. It really isn't.
Thank you, Carl. Please, both of you, remember to use your sources when making the rebuttals as well. Christy, your final rebuttal.
Yes, thank you very much. So I have to say that what I'm really hearing from Carl is complaints that he finds other people's opinions offensive. And while he is certainly entitled to be offended by what other people say online.
Sorry, I forgot to mention one point about his Sargon's closing there. Pathologically entitled. How about that for a point, huh? That is smart verbiage to really screw with the stance. If that could only be shown as to why feminism is not a force for good, it would be fantastic. Might I suggest that individuals who are pathologically entitled will focus on their own personal needs over the goals set out by the movement for which they have adhered to. If you are so entitled, then you will not put your efforts into the success of the movement unless it deals entirely with your own personal success. If via the success of the movement you lose your entitlements, whether it's the increased attention, the job, or any type of special treatment, then you're not going to be dedicated to that movement as a whole. That argument there shows why it isn't. Feminism is not a force for good, because it will have, if it's populated by these bad actors, it makes it impossible for the movement to actually ever achieve its goals, and instead remains a self-sustaining cycle of creating fake outrage, talking about it, receiving money, bringing awareness, and then stopping dead because it is incapable of resolving any issues. Because if it does, it loses its position. Sorry, I'll let Ms. Winters continue about how she feels about how she feels about Sargon's statements.
And what they express, that doesn't really provide justification for us to say that feminism, to the answer to the question, is feminism a force for good in the world? No. He's entirely ignoring all of the activism that I pointed out in my initial opening statement. He's not addressing the issue of honor killings and how that is a gender practice. It's happening in the UK, and yet he's not bringing that up. We're not talking about the need to redefine rape in order to get male victims counted.
Men is an afterthought. This is what I would like to call the blind spot argument here. I think I mentioned it in the previous video. What's going on is Sargon's listed out reasoning behind why there's individuals out there who are bad actors within the feminist community. And with bad actors and bad research, you're not going to have a very good time of applying the ideology and methodologies from it in resolving significant issues. What Ms. Winters is doing here is saying that, well, because you're not focusing on this problem, and because you're not focusing on that problem, your argument is invalid. That is a fallacy. That is not true in the slightest. One cannot have their focus a 360-degree approach. You cannot put your focus on all things at all times. Instead, you have to spend a little time at point A and a little bit of time at point B and a little bit of time at point C and so forth. She doesn't seem to believe that to be the case, and this is often a trope used by individuals within stringent ideologies like Christianity, like Islam, like feminism, to defend their positions by, when challenged with legitimate points from opposition, say, well, what about the good we do? What about the good we do? What about the Nation of Islam, who provides alcohol and drug treatment for prisoners? We're going to ignore the fact that we give them Wahhabist Bible or Wahhabist Qurans with edited hadiths to show and value the violent side of jihad. No, we're going to ignore that part because look at all the good we do. Look at all the good we do. And it's this bouncing around. Look at how terrible the Catholic Church has abused women and children and has stolen money from people, and how it has special privileges in our society, how the Pope is considered a demigod almost. But when you challenged Catholics on this point, they turn around and say, well, what about our mission work? Why aren't you focusing on that? It's impossible to pin these people down when they can just easily use that blind spot argument. So by listening to that, when someone starts to suddenly change the topic away from the central argument which you have put forward, even if Sargon's, in this case here, is as weak as it has been, internally consistent, but unattached to the central point, you have to turn around and target them on that. Well, how can one focus on all this? If you want to play that game, what about these issues which feminists are not engaging in? It's an easy score for you because you can riposte so rapidly on it. There's an endless number of issues. She could not possibly name them all within her 5 minutes. So anything, even if she dedicated the next 4.5 minutes naming to every single issue, she will not get them all. And that gives you the opportunity to turn around and say, right back to her, any of them that were missed. And then that argument is applied equally well by both sides. It's still equally fallacious, but we can see kind of the inherent hypocrisy whenever someone tries to apply it.
Seen as the victims that they are so that they can be dealt with in the justice system. What I feel...
The victims that they are. Value the victim. I understand that within feminist ideology, the importance for bringing out the voices of victims. Without those voices, then we are, for the most part, unaware of maybe what could be just an individual issue. It could be a systemic issue, or it could be a systematic issue. And without hearing the voices of victims, you will never know which is which. The problem with this is we end up spending all of our time talking to victims about their victimization and nothing about resolving it. And without resolving it, the system will just, or the situations will just continue to produce more victims. In essence, you're treating the symptom, not the cause, by doing that.
That Carl is doing is just throwing around a lot of stereotypes, buzzwords, and making a lot of sort of hasty generalizations based on what a few people that he sought out have said online, and from that wanting to discount over 150 years of work trying to improve women's lives around the globe, half the population's lives around the globe. And I just don't feel that he's taking this to...
Look at how we've improved half the women's lives around the globe, half the population around the globe. Well, one, you haven't, because you've already illustrated that most of the world is actually not benefiting from feminism yet and desperately needs it. That's why feminism is a force for good in the world, because it has so much work left to do. 150 years of it. Look at how it's been helping women. Oh, but don't forget about the men we've helped too. Again, men as an afterthought. This is set up time and again. Easy pins to knock down. They won't be, most unfortunately. And a few people online, not true at all. We know what these movements look like. We know we could tune on to almost any publication online that's considered on the left, even center to all the way into the left, or majority of television commercials, television shows. There are these themes which exist within them that he is illustrating. It is wrong to just dismiss it because he hasn't talked to every single feminist in existence. That is an absurd standard to put someone to. To do that is to effectively eliminate opponents by saying, because you haven't talked to everyone, there's no way you can know exactly what we're all doing. And if you can't know what we're all doing, you have no right to judge us, criticize us. It's a very poor argument she's putting forward here. And in fact, she is whinging just as hard as Sargon, as she claims Sargon is doing. The internal consistency of her argument, however, is not there, unlike Sargon's.
Debate particularly seriously. These are important issues about the quality of people's lives, about girls' education, and also extending the way that feminists have established new discourses in a public situation, like rape, that then when they do the surveys, as I pointed to about taking the survey about rape in the U.S. military, male victims are coming forward as a consequence of women taking up a crime that disproportionately affects women. It then has a knock-on effect.
But men are the afterthought still, which is one thing that I keep pointing out, but it is so easy to do so. You hear this over and over again. Look at all the effort women have done for women, or feminists have done for women. Oh, and yeah, and then men get some benefit down the line. To me, willfully building a methodology which acts in this manner is not a moral approach. While it may produce good and may produce moral consequences, it is not inherently a true moral or good force, because it willfully, in its methodology, ignores groups which are affected the same as the groups which it focuses on.
We've talked about the importance of access to contraception and the attacks on that, at least in the United States. And there are global issues that don't deal with the first world that actually I think if the Skeptic Feminist, I'd sent you about 42 references. I didn't see them all in the links below. But in my links, I've got...
Oh, look at me. Look at all the sources I've provided. All of them. Oh, 42 sources for this short debate. Unnecessary boasting. That doesn't make your argument any better. I mean, if you look at some of these feminist papers which are produced, like the inherent sexism and masculinity of carbon steel, for example, it has something like 50 references on it. It's either that one or the glaciology one. There's a ton of references on it. That doesn't mean that they're all good or the paper is any more legitimate, especially if they're referencing bad sources.
Links to the Feminist Majorities campaign on helping women who are suffering under the Sultan of Brunei's near Taliban policies, about policies to stop female genital mutilation, policies to end acid violence against women. And although I'm sure for YouTube it is very convenient to spend a lot of time attacking stereotypes of feminists and talking about women on Tumblr with blue hair, that doesn't really deal with the real world. And I think if we're going to have a serious debate, we need to move beyond people fighting on the internet, in the Twitter sphere, and actually look at what feminism is doing on a daily basis for people.
So what is feminism doing on a daily basis for people? I mean, it's very nice to talk about these awareness campaigns and some policies set forth, but are we seeing traction happening? Are we seeing change happening? And if we are getting the change, is the change happening because of feminist methodologies, or is it happening because of other governmental and non-governmental organizations engaging with the affected areas to bring about policy change? And there's just a feminist who happens to be on staff. You cannot claim with definite certainty that any change that takes place which benefits women is a result of feminism. That is patently not true. Anytime a secular activist restores or builds up the barrier which ought to exist between church and state, that by the consequences of that action, improves the lives of women. It protects them from traditionally patriarchal religions that have a deep disdain for female autonomy. Those secularists may be feminists, but they may not be feminists. So feminism cannot claim victory in those cases. It's nice to lay out policies and to talk about awareness, but awareness does nothing for you if you have no teeth, no holds that you can use to bring those policies about. I could sit here right now and go off for an hour about important policies that ought to affect us and ought to go into effect for NASA to ensure that biotechnology, when it comes to cybernetics, should not be applied on the average human at a will. Like, I could go into deep detail on that in a whole policy discussion and then bring awareness to people about it. Does it mean I have any ability to actually implement it? Absolutely not. So you have to have a stronger, more mobilized force, and you can't just claim that because good does happen and it does line up with your beliefs, that it was you who did it. This effectively comes down to Hitchens' razor. Name an action committed by, name a deed or an act done by a religious person that could not have otherwise been done by an atheist. Then this has its own equivalent here. Name a deed or action done by a feminist that could not have also been done by another ideology. If there's other ideologies which are able to produce that same outcome as the feminist one, to achieve the same goals as the feminist one, then feminism cannot take exclusive domain over the success of that goal. In fact, becomes a shared operation. So when we hear look at all these things that feminists are doing for women around the world, you just need to ask yourself about the success rate of that and the mechanisms behind it, and ask for, don't play the blind spot game, but just ask for one well thought out argument or example of an organization focusing on one particular issue in one particular area and how it went from bringing awareness about to how it implemented policies. If you can show that, then you can say that is an instance of feminism doing good. If it cannot also be explained by other ideologies and methodologies acting on that same process. Otherwise, you have to concede, one must concede, in fact, that is a mix of factors that brings that about.
Lives. The fact that we all, at least in the West, have access to contraception, in part, at least in the US, starting because Margaret Sanger was seeing how uncontrolled pregnancies was destroying women's health, it was destroying families' economic stability, and it was destroying women's lives. And it was a massive step culturally and scientifically to move forward into the medicine to get us to the point where women can control our fertility.
This control the number of children issue has been a major issue for humans throughout time. It's no shock to humans that when we were nomadic, having a brood of children makes it extremely difficult for them to all survive. So there was methods which were engaged in well before feminism to ensure that you were not laden down with too many children, which would effectively, through our own acts of empathy, kill the children and possibly ourselves as parents. So to claim that Margaret Sanger while she most certainly made the argument that we need a system to better control the birth rates, this is not feminists' act, that this is a new idea that came out of nowhere made by a feminist, and that's why we have it today. Not the least bit true. Not the least bit true.
And then huge.
Which, by the way, when you bring up a point like that, actually undermines the argument which she is making here, which is, feminists are the ones who really drove the process of developing contraceptives so that women could enjoy sex without the risk of having children within that family setting or that relationship setting. And by turning around and saying, well, actually, this is a practice which had been engaged in for centuries prior to even the first thought of feminists, and that it was merely well-timed that you had a feminist thinker and science that allowed the development of this contraceptive to actually take root. That does harm the argument very well to make it seem more coincidental rather than some long-standing concerted effort by feminists. If you go through the history of development of contraceptives, feminism did play a minor role in it. I say minor because it was coincidental that you had a small growing force at the time of women who looked to do more with their lives but wanted to also have protections within their relationships. In fact, a lot of the women arguing for it said that it should only exclusively be given to married couples. That's not very powerful in regards to the development of women's sexual freedom if they say that only married couples should be allowed to get the contraceptive pill.
Knock-on effect that has, because until that time, unless you were using the cycle method of only having sex, certain times of the month, the entire burden for contraception fell on men, either through condoms or withdrawal. And so feminism, by bringing up the issue of contraception, has basically made it possible for everyone to have a lot more and better sex.
Again, completely wrong, as I laid out just a moment ago there. Contraception for women did provide that, but could we have continued using better contraceptives, or could better contraceptives been used by men to prevent equal number of pregnancies? And I would say yes, it is very possible that's the case. With strong sexual education, you could have done that. Women wanting to explore themselves sexually benefited greatly from the access to contraceptives. That is not wrong, but to assume that is entirely the efforts of feminism and not of science or humanism or egalitarianism or secular thinking, which wanted to erode some of the patriarchal traditions held by Christianity in the West over women's lives, is patently false. And this is one of those claims that feminists can make, and if it goes unchallenged, it just kind of reverberates in people's ears. So that's the game she is playing right here. If unchallenged on this, that's a point for her, because it wasn't knocked down, it wasn't defeated, it wasn't shown to be a falsity like it is.
And that's actually really important. I mean, it's important.
Feminism is the reason we have good sex today, is ultimately what she just said there.
For the quality of life, in terms of, as being a human being who has sexual drives, and living in a world where every time you had sex, you didn't know if you're going to have another child, maybe adding to the fourth or fifth one that you have. That's a burden that we no longer face in the West. But women in the Philippines, women in developing countries, especially Catholic countries, don't have that kind of access. Those families don't have that kind of protection. And I think that that's really a much better place to be focusing on, rather than on the stereotypes, buzzwords, and also just not naming names. I'm sure that Carl, if he named it, could name all the popular feminists. But if there are all these thousands of feminists who
I'm not stopping
are
here
out
because
there
I really don't
doing
care
these
what she's saying.
I
She
think
is
you'd
just
probably be able
prattling
to
on about
name
nothing.
specific names and cite specific instances instead of just speaking in generalities. So again, I don't see any reason.
By the way, if you cite a particular hashtag campaign, that is a specific instance of stupidity. And the dismissal of that was a very cheap trick by Ms. Winters. It would have been far better for her to have skipped over this point, because I think at this point she's actually losing. Statements like that cause her to lose ground in this debate very rapidly. Very rapidly, and other than her hard contention that follows, the Feminism is always good side of things, where everything good in the world is thanks to feminism cohort.
Convincing reason to refute the idea that, yes, feminism has been good, a force for good in the world, based on his comments.
Feminism even that there. Look at that statement. Look at that nice little slip. Feminism has been good in the world. Yes, it has been. But we're not here to discuss whether or not feminism has done something good. We're here to discuss if it's a force for good now and later. We know it's been good because it did provide particular social capital to make some very specific changes in our world. With it being past those points, its list of goals already completed, it ought to have retired itself. It didn't. Anyways.
And I yield my time
Has
back
been
to
good.
moderate.
Has been good.
Thank you very much, Christy. Carl, your final rebuttal, please.
Sure, nobody's debating whether feminism has been good for the world. The question is whether it is good now. And these are important issues, Christy. You're right. Which is why an anti-scientific, self-serving, supremacist ideology is not the solution. Please.
Whoa! He's coming up swinging here. How about that, everybody? And this is the very element, this is the fire that you want to see from a debater. Not only did he grab onto the last few of her words there, a recency effect for all of us listening, he has now pinned it down and started pummeling it by being flat honest about her own words being used against her and driving ahead. Now is the time that in the second rebuttal, where you get the last one, to engage entirely with your opponent's ideas and destroy them, tear them apart. And the more successful you are in this process there, the more you will incorporate into your closing statements. Tear it apart. Show that it is not a solution for today, that it is not a solution for the world. Feminism is not a solution for our world problems, whether we're talking about the West or South America's Catholicism that puts women down, or the Middle East's Islam that puts women down, or Indonesia's Islam, or India's caste, remnants of the caste system, which also had women within each caste at a lower status, and so forth. You show that its research, that its methodologies are flawed deeply. If you do that at this point, if he can pull that off at this point, he can turn the debate.
Trying to keep up and not stop telling me how you feel. You can try and erase the reality of modern feminism if you want, but this willful ignorance is killing feminism.
That is an instant point, because he's targeted her statements, her approach to just these overarching generalities. Oh, yeah, we're trying to help people, and he's just talking about, in essence, arguing that he's just talking about bad actors. He can't name the names of those bad actors, but that's all he's talking about. And the response is, yeah, you're just trying to erase the mistakes that modern feminism is on right now. Finally, we're seeing Sargon engage in this debate and really get into it. We're seeing him look at the arguments and points made by Ms. Winters and rip them apart. It is excellent. Another point for Sargon there.
Because, look, everything about feminism is logically inconsistent. Imagine believing that an overarching power was oppressing you, then haughtily appealing to that power to stop oppressing you. Why would it stop? When complaining about the wage gap, if women really could be paid less because of their gender, why hire men?
Interesting point there. Women could be paid less because of their gender, and as a result of women being paid less for their gender, they also brought men's wage down so that it didn't look like women were being paid that way for their gender. There is a research study on it. I linked it in the description in my first video, and I will do that again for this one.
Women really are losing $400,000 per year and becoming a poor, oppressed underclass living in a pink-collar ghetto. Why do they account for 85% of consumer spending? Why are women even treated like an oppressed minority when they aren't? In the United States, a country with women's rights, equality of the law, and universal suffrage, 50% of the population are women. Note 4, I think.
Sargon just used a note. Notice how Ms. Winters in her last one didn't use a note? She didn't use a note in her first one, or her second one. But Sargon used a note. He's staying on with the points provided by the Skeptic Feminist.
But if one were to look at Saudi Arabia, a place which is actually oppressive to women, they have a female population of only 43%. Bahrain is just like this, with a female population of only 38%. And believe it or not, according to the World Bank, the United Arab Emirates' female population is only 26%. Now, I'm no fancy-schmancy social scientist, but, you know...
Funny. Good entertainment value right there, because he's mocking the development of these statistics, in essence. But we're talking about population survey data, not questionnaire data, which is a very large difference.
I don't know whether correlation implies causation in these cases, but isn't that what social science is for? Shouldn't feminists be looking at the data of what appears to be deeply oppressed populations of women who seem to actually be suffering under their yoke? Don't any of them think this is the most important feminist issue? It's even more important than the colour of toys in a kid's store. Instead, they are busy inventing conspiracy theories about the West, about oppression where none can be measured to exist. And now that feminism is intersectional, it must consider the lived experiences of black, gay, and trans people using the same logic. Replace man with white, woman with black, straight with gay, cis with trans, and voila! Through the magic of feminist logic, now everyone's oppressed. White men hold most of the top jobs in majority white countries, white supremacy at work, despite there being a black president at the tops.
So, we're starting to get some really good traction coming from him here as he's pointing out each individual or elements of the feminist methodology, it being intersectionality in this particular case here, making the obvious note that if feminists were honestly concerned about the plight of women in general, then the focus, all those efforts, all those tweets ought to be going towards resolving those issues, not this faux oppression because you're not having a good time of things. And hey, if you fail, it's always someone else's fault mentality. But then continuing on with it, just rolling it down, having a good time about it. He's just nailing it over and over and over and over again. Sorry,
half black. I'm sure that really matters to the racists, who I presume are voting for the white half.
Jesus. Because we're all racist under, if you believe in intersectionality, then if you're white, you're immediately racist. I lost my point. I was going to make a good one there. But this is what you want to see from somebody who's getting engaged.
And are majority African countries black supremacist? Nothing about feminism or the intersectional monster it spawned has any logical consistency to it whatsoever. So new and exciting explanations must be invented through the feminist's second magical power, the ability to read minds.
Okay, before I let him get into that point there, intersectionality is a beast spawned of feminism. It was a woman within the feminist movement who said, I don't think my voice is being heard well enough, and it's time for my voice to be heard, and I'm probably not the only one who's in this position, so we need a system by which we can better identify unheard voices. Welcome to intersectionality. We want to focus on the groups within the groups. That's essentially what intersectionality is, and it's now become such a wicked sword that it's used to legitimize any position out there by saying if you're not this particular set of modules, then you are against one particular module. So I also have a video on it. I'll link that in the description below on intersectionality, how I think it works. It's well received. It's also on the Skeptic Feminist channel, which you see here. You can just search for it, but I'll also put it in the description.
More men than women in STEM? That's because those men are misogynistic. They don't hire women because they hate them. More black people in jail than whites by proportion? That's because the majority white police force is racist and they hate them. You don't have any gay people on your television show? That's because you're homophobic and you hate them. The ability to discern the true motivations of people that they've never met is nothing short of miraculous, to the point where they have identified, and I quote, that literally everything and everyone is problematic.
Where the fuck was this at the start of the fucking debate? Where was this in his opening statements? If he used this here to begin with, people would be like, whoa, what is he going on about? And then added in the kind of, this is the stupidity which they spout. It comes from bad data. This is why the data is bad. Look at the research into the social science data and how terrible it is. And now we're going to continue along and show further why intersectionality is bad. We're going to continue on and just nail down the very particulars as to why patriarchy is tossed around so easily by feminists in trying to undermine the position of men in the world, despite the fact that the majority of men are not against women in the West.
This politically correct witch hunt has left feminism pointing the finger at every single institution, cultural event, and individual for all of recorded history. Then viewing the world through the intersectional system of oppression means there's nowhere to escape from one's inherited privilege and no way of absolving a straight white male from the original sin of being born to the wrong gender, developing the wrong sexuality, and receiving the genetic heritage of the wrong race. What I'm saying is, if you believe that everything in the world is wrong despite all the evidence to the contrary, then perhaps you should stop pointing the finger at others and consider pointing it at yourself.
Whoa. There you go. You want a guy with this kind of fire debating for your point. That is the kind of stuff that should have been at the beginning. There he is. He's laid it out. There's a consistently laid out argument here that the monster of intersectionality has manipulated so many people's input into larger systems, quote-unquote systems which exist, to say that anything that doesn't benefit a minority means that if you're opposite to the minority, you're perpetuating that barrier, and therefore it's not because you are personally benefiting from it and are ignorant to the suffering of others, it's because you actually willfully hate the other. When you have an ideology that weighs itself so much into groups and the demarcation and delineation of each group and the groups within the groups and so forth, then it makes it very easy to say, well, we're the ones suffering, they're not, so it's because they hate us. And this divining, or mind reading as he likes to put it, is a fair point. When you consider about the number of people who go on about the suffering of minorities in a variety of different cases, and then blaming in the most general way, not all feminists, but all men, kind of an ideology or approach, you can't help but think that they are just pretending that they know more. That they are divining out of you exactly what your intentions are. They know what I'm thinking, and that's why I hate them. It is utterly absurd, and that absurdity, mind you, is the essence of modern feminism. And because it's the essence of modern feminism, it is illogical, and its application to resolving these significant issues will never come to fruition. Because it is illogical, it cannot be applied. It is not stable. So by focusing on kind of the central operations of how feminism works, which has in short kind of the angle of his argument, although the first half wasn't that great, he's starting to strike at the more nebulous approach that Ms. Winters has taken. If you see someone taking a nebulous approach, well, look at all the good we do. Well, what good? Well, there's issues with... Well, we're not talking about the issues. We're talking about the good you've done. That's quite nebulous to dance around like that. And he's being very specific, very direct here about how the feminism itself functions currently.
This is really happening, Christy. These are the popular feminists, Christy. This is the popular feminist narrative. You can deny it all you want, but like I said, this denial is killing feminism. I yield.
So there you go. There's the summation of that particular segment. An element that was missing, in essence, from the first couple segments. To have that brief summary in a flowing manner shows forethought, shows preparation, and frequently, if done in the way he does, passion. Denying the current state of feminism and the issues which it embodies is harming feminism. So he's not just looking to mock and deride particular feminists. He's actually focused on feminism as an ideology, as a methodology here, in showing that by denying its failings, by saying they aren't there, to say the house isn't on fire, everything is fine, no, this is all okay, this is normal, is actually going to result in that house being burned out before any of the inhabitants can actually flee and do anything positive about it.
Thank you very much, Carl. Next are the 5-minute closing statements.
He had a minute left there. So thus far in the debate, he has had 20 minutes to speak, and he has not used 6 minutes of it.
Christy, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So when we were asked the question, is feminism a force for good in the world, I did the research in order to look.
She did the research. Don't you understand? She did the research. She pulled up all those flawed studies, all those bogus statistics, and all those hyperbolic news articles. She did the research, and guess what? Those climate scientists don't know what they're talking about. This one person knows what she's talking about. She knows the plight of all women across society and the world right now. She knows what the intentions are of other people, which make it impossible for feminists to exact any kind of change via their policy methods. She knows because she's done the research. That absurd statement is condescending and idiotic to its core. No one cares if you've done the research. That's an assumption that we take as the audience as you go through this. It's a waste of oxygen to produce such an idiotic string of words, and it doesn't strengthen your argument in any way. Just like saying, well, look at all these references I've got here. If all the references are literally asswipe. Well, not literally asswipe, but in essence, intellectually asswipe. It comes across no different than the intelligent designer, teleological supporter in other words, or the climate denier. I've done the research. That has no bearing on the value of your arguments. None whatsoever. So don't make a stupid statement like that if you're debating somebody. Nobody cares. We care about what your argument actually is. I've done the research doesn't mean your argument is any better.
Look at the world itself and the history of feminism.
Well, she's looked at the world, guys. The world, the world? What the fuck is she on about? Clearly, Sargon's last run has shaken her up. It's thrown her off her game. She probably had a nice, tight, and tidy, and neat closing statement that she thought she would be able to easily breeze through. And Sargon's last run there absolutely shook her up. There's no doubt about it. He landed blow after blow after blow there by exposing the problems with the methodology of feminism and how it continues to perpetuate itself as being some super force in the world while actually not having the least bit of legitimate standing because of the willfulness of feminists to ignore their own issues within their cohort.
And where it's going now. And I'm very disappointed that Carl has chosen to use his time to use buzzwords, but he can't cite sources. If you noticed in his last 2 rebuttals, he stopped actually listing any real sources.
Real sources. He listed exactly infinitely more than you did in your last 2 rebuttals, in fact. And this point here is, to the audience members paying attention, begins to come across as scripted. She was going to say that regardless of what happened. Regardless of what happened.
And that's because he's using buzzwords and contempt and not evidence-based grounded argument.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with arguing from contempt. In fact, that's what's fueling me to go through this right now, because I have a deep contempt for individuals like Miss Winters who tend to manipulate her own statements, the data which she has derived things from, and the place that her education has given her in order to have some type of higher standing in the larger community of the discourse. The best we can see is just whinging and awareness raising, which does nothing to actually bring about any substantial change. That contempt that fuels me towards her is good, because I have an outlet for it. Sargon has contempt. He has an outlet for it, and he's very good at it. Look at him smirking down there. He's like, you fucking tool. You know very well that contempt is fine. In fact, contempt is exactly what fuels her to continue down the feminist path to make the changes in the world that will benefit women. Oh, and men. Don't forget men. Men is the afterthought. They always have to come after women are served.
If there was such a problem with women or feminists, men and women who are feminists, saying these things, instead of just using generalities and making assumptions about what people are doing, for instance, reading people's minds, he would be able to go through and list feminist after feminist after feminist after feminist saying these things. But he can't, because he constructs the arguments rather than citing the evidence.
He constructs the arguments rather than citing the evidence. So by constructing an argument and laying it out there, a very easy, smooth flowing argument that is internally consistent when it cites the very sources from which it comes from, because he's not naming the specific persons in it, it means there's no value to it. False, wrong, and stupid to its absolute core. It is the pinnacle of idiocy right there. When you're debating an idea, it doesn't matter who's espousing the idea. You don't have to name those people. You can just bring up examples of idiots operating within it. But if you notice, the focus of Sargon, especially in the last element there, was how it, as an ideology, as an approach to solving these issues, it's so inherently flawed because when you put a person with those ideologies embodied with them into the system, this is the output that you get. Garbage in, garbage out. So by not naming names, in essence, he's moving away from talking about people and he's staying on the topic of ideas. If you were to name people over and over again, she would turn around and say, well, you're just talking about a few people. Not all people are represented by bell hooks. Not all people are represented by Anita Sarkeesian. She would engage in that if he went with that approach. All right? It is not a legitimate criticism of his argument at all.
And I also find it very confusing that on the one hand, Carl utterly dismisses social science data as pointless, useless, constructed by a bunch of liberals in the Ivory Tower, and then complains that I'm not using the social science data that he is dismissing as not being credible. At the end of the day, what Carl is trying...
That's a really myopic view of things. He says there's some significant flaws with it, and he's mocking that very fact later on, but social science data is different from population demographics derived by an organization like the World Bank. He was actually making quite a bit of fun at your expense. That's why he's smirking down there, because to you've read his mind, Ms. Winters, and have decided that Sargon actually was acting out in an immature and childish way and is acting contradictory because he doesn't understand what he's even saying.
To do here is move the topic away from the question of feminism in the real world over to an internet-based...
He's trying to move the topic away of how feminism is currently working in the world. No, he's showing that Twitter actually exists within the world. That Twitter's not a separate dimension or planet or galaxy, and that it's actually part and parcel with everything else that's going on with feminism. And if you just want to know what feminists look like, you can go on to places like Twitter and search popular hashtags, which they engage in. You can go and see who's tweeting about it and click on their bios and go to their Tumblrs or their websites or the journals that they write for and see exactly what they think about particular topics. And what you get from that is an endless source of complaints about how oppressed and how unfair things are for them because they're a woman and men are putting me down and, oh, it's hard, without actually turning around and looking at how men are actually in the pretty much exact same position as you are on average. It is a baseless argument. It's a very poor argument. She is shaken here. She is shaken. And when you see your opponent shaken like that, you can laugh it off as being completely baseless. You don't need... This point here is not the least bit addressable yet.
Discourse of buzzwords and phrases that he...
Buzzwords. Well, do you know what? You've used the word buzzword more often than he has used a buzzword.
can't substantiate with evidence that he's not providing sources for. And so when we look at the day-to-day activities, if you go to the website of NOW, if you go to the website of Feminist Majority, they are doing campaigns for women in their own countries, they're doing campaigns for women abroad. We're seeing that the Feminist Majority on Rape is Rape made an effort to include penetration in a way that included male victims. So we're seeing.
What about forced enveloping? What about forced enveloping? Did they go that far? So that a woman can actually rape a man? No. Penetration of men is the only time it counts as rape. So if you want to talk about how feminists are campaigning to change the place of rape in our culture, to really identify it so we can properly criminalize it, then you have to include the full run of it. And that's a woman raping a man by drugging him, feeding him too much alcohol, and then sleeping with him, forcing the envelopment of his penis in order to have sex with him. That is rape. If he did not consent, that is rape. Why is it considered by this feminist logic here that, oh no, it's not rape, that's not consent, it's sexual assault, it's not okay. But oh, if she stuck one finger up his butt, that's not rape. No, this is a significant failing on feminists here because they haven't addressed this. You can go on endlessly about how you've talked about it and you're starting to listen to the voices of male rape victims. Male rape victims are rape victims not only of men, but of women. Okay, that is the truth. And if you want to say that you've claimed a victory over it, you actually have to complete the fucking job to claim the fucking victory.
Seeing that men are benefiting from feminism. We're seeing the effects of.
Only as an afterthought, though. Remember that. She has done this the entire time. Keep pointing it out. Whenever a feminist goes on like this about how men are benefiting from the acts of feminism, they're benefiting from it not in the same way women are. Women are the ones who are getting it. Women are the ones who are the primary recipients, and that men benefit too. If that is the approach, it is not a moral one, despite the fact that it may produce moral results.
Women advocating for contraception access and the way that that's improved lives. I've talked about the way that working for family leave and paid family leave has improved.
No, she hasn't. No, she hasn't. She's just said that's important and feminists want it. Well, okay. Whoop-de-doo. Whoop-de-doo. It does nothing. That means nothing. It doesn't add anything when you argue in that manner.
Families' economic statuses. So when I talk about feminism, I'm focused on real-life solutions to real-life problems. And while that's not of interest to Carl because that's not clearly what his focus is, I don't think that our time is best spent talking about what people on Tumblr are talking about. I think that there's real-world activism that is going on, that needs to be supported, that needs to be praised.
Let's make sure that when you engage in these kind of black holes of intelligence, sucking in everything indiscriminately and not really doing anything with it, that you force them to define elements. Activism, she includes awareness campaigns, which comprises the vast majority of feminist efforts. Awareness campaigns. Awareness campaigns don't change shit. They do very little beyond, hey, this is an issue. Pointing out there's a fire beside you doesn't put out the fucking fire. And when the fire department comes and puts it out, you can't claim that you put out the fire because you saw it first. That is, in essence, the argument which Miss Winters is putting forward here. If you could put out the fire, put out the fire. If you need help putting out the fire, recruit people to help you put out the fire. But just saying there's a fire there is not fucking enough.
And I also basically reject the characterization of academia and the social sciences from my own personal experience.
The personal is not political, so no one gives a shit. Your personal experience means nothing in this regard.
I would like to say his personal experience with higher education, how many sociology classes he's taken, how many academic journals he's read, and has he actually done research beyond Scientific America's blog or blogs that summarize studies. If he's actually gone in and read a lot of these studies himself, I think there's a characterization of what happens in academia, and then there's what's happened in academia. And it's not that much different from what I see when creationists try to push the idea that evolutionists are promoting atheism in the classroom, or evolutionists are promoting atheists in college universities.
full fucking stop. Hold on a second here. Wait. What the fuck? No. No, 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 no. You can't just say, well, because the field of study which I am interested in, and which I have educated myself in, and he hasn't, it means that I am the authority. This is the argument of appealing to authority. It is a fallacious argument at its very core, because if the authority's data, if the authority's information is wrong, both in a truthiness sense, but also in a moral sense, then they can advocate stuff from that position of authority and perpetuate it forward. This is what she is saying here. Because you haven't taken these courses, Sargon, because you haven't done the research, like conducted actual research, because you haven't published, you have no way of knowing the actual truth of any of these claims. It is bogus. It is an appeal to authority. It is fallacious. It should be rejected. This is a fantastic example of appeal to authority. When anyone starts citing their credentials as justification as why they are more right than their opponent who lacks those credentials, that's an example of appeal to authority. Reject it outright. Do not let it stand. It takes a sentence to get rid of. Put it in there because everyone else listening will pick up on it very quickly.
By teaching evolution, the idea that
that's a non-fucking sequitur there, that evolution versus creationist teaching. Unless that, well, she probably believes that she's on the evolution side of things, whereas the rest of us strongly believe they're on the creationist side of things. In fact, if you see some of the arguments put forward, like, oh, there is no true gender. When are we born, a blank fucking slate and then socialized? Well, guess what? That is what a lot of feminists do believe, that we are a blank slate, and that society socializes us into these roles. It is a fucking absurd statement. The argument by analogy here between evolution and creationism in classrooms makes no sense, and in fact it actually works against her here because she is not on the side with the overwhelming amount of positive data supporting her claim.
these things are happening on a similar fashion with feminism is just also refuted by the facts. Now, had I known that Carl was going to have a discussion about the social sciences instead of feminism, I would have prepared that. But I would like to stay focused on the question, is feminism a force for good in the world? And I think undoubtedly when we look at first wave feminism and second wave feminism and feminism activism, even as it's going on today, we're seeing improvement in people's lives. We're seeing the identification of blind spots, gendered blind spots of male victims. We're seeing blind spots in rape laws. We're seeing opportunities to improve.
By the way, that rape law element ties back into her original point with the Oklahoma rape case, which I went over in the first video. That's not a blind spot in the rape law. In fact, it's well covered already, and there's no reason for us to even believe for a moment that that's the case anywhere else. The FBI's definition, mind you, has still not changed to include forced envelopment, so this victory being repeated yet again is not a true victory. It's not there. It's half-baked at best. Male victims, yeah, still an afterthought.
People's lives in the developed world and in the developing world. And so in conclusion, based on the arguments and evidence and the vitriol and the hasty generalizations and the lack of substantiated accusations aside, I think the preponderance of evidence really must fall down on the side.
All the evidence aside, ignoring the evidence, oh, and that vitriol and hasty judgments and such, but the vitriol, all that, the evidence, all that evidence aside, the preponderance of evidence, what? I thought we just dismissed that evidence. That's a weird word slip.
Yes, feminism is a force for good in the world. I yield my time.
Thank fucking Christ we don't have to listen to her talk anymore.
Thank you both very much. I suppose
Ignore
what we can do is use the spare time.
Carl's got a closing. Carl's got a closing. He's got his closing 5 minutes.
Of course. My apologies. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Well done for attacking.
Yeah, so what you'll notice that she, even in her closing there, focused on attacking Sargon's character. That is an ad hominem. Because it does nothing to actually address the central core of his argument or anything else he's put forward. She attacks him and then says her evidence is better than his evidence. because his evidence is based upon vitriol and contempt and hasty generalizations and is not from the core of social sciences and the ivory tower from which she comes from. It is an ad hominem, and just like the appeal to authority or argument from authority, it's a fallacy that undermines one's central point.
The man and not the argument, Christy, constantly. I am citing studies, I'm citing statistics, and yet you won't accept it. And that doesn't surprise me from someone whose entire career is based on feminism and can undoubtedly see the bleak future that feminism is going to enjoy. Look, I'm talking about the real world. When Barack Obama says 1 in 5 women have been raped, there's a 77% pay gap, blah, 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 these are things that...
Yeah, I know I've used that phrase while I've been chatting here with you guys, but using blah, 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 blah in a closing argument, which should be as well constructed as your opening argument with a few time gaps in it to allow additions from that have been derived from the rebuttal process is as a style, as a form, is not very good. Is not very good.
Are happening in the real world. And they're based on nonsense. We have the people who did the study telling us so. Feminism is not based on reliable empirical data. It is riddled with bias, as are you, Christy. I could give you a list of famous, prominent, academic, and popular feminists if you want after this debate. That's easy. I do that on a daily goddamn basis, all right? Feminism has conclusions...
Love that vitriol. Love that contempt. There's nothing wrong with showing it. Nothing wrong at all.
By political bias. It is on the verge of collapsing under its own inconsistencies and requires Orwellian levels of control to maintain via the suppression of other people's rights. Feminism is not good for the world because the world is where reality is, and reality is the mortal enemy of modern-day intersectional feminism.
That screed sums up much of the central argument, which really didn't show its face until his second rebuttal. Wonderful. It's passionate. It's to the point. It's rejecting the very claims that she puts forward by, again, dismissing the idea that feminism is this clean, smooth operating force when it is riddled with bad actors and ugly outcomes and very questionable strategies in dealing with these proposed inequalities, which chances are those inequalities aren't even real based upon the quality of evidence that comes out of these feminist researchers. I just surmised most of what he has been arguing that whole debate there in a sentence, which probably doesn't bode well for the rest of the quality of his work. But ideally, that kind of line of reasoning will show its head a little more.
I wouldn't expect feminism to be able to produce an empirical fact if it wanted to. And I certainly wouldn't expect feminism to provide an analysis rooted in reason. And given that many feminists seem to draw deep emotional and spiritual comfort from feminism, it's easy to see why they all think that the ends justify the means.
So this is similar to the statement he made after his first rebuttal, where he said it was bordering on the religious. Bordering on the religious. That is very true, and the reason why it can't produce an empirical fact is by the production of the empirical fact that may begin to erode the basis for feminism. That empirical fact would have to be outright rejected or labeled as poor data. In other words, heretical, and would require to be discarded. So even if it could produce it, it wouldn't accept it. The idea here that he is proposing with the ends justifying the means is that feminism will be more than willing to engage in bad research, bad policy, and frankly, bad tactics, all the way down to the very last man standing in their way, just as long as women end up protected with their equal rights to men. If you could end the rape epidemic, then you have done good. Right? Well, if you have to kill 90% of men in order to make that happen, then no. Ending rape as being the end does not justify the means of killing off a huge portion of men or imprisoning a huge portion of men or so forth. All right, that is in essence what is being argued here. The emotional and spiritual comfort is a fantastic additional dig to show that these are two elements which are inherently not grounded in reason, something that feminism tends to kind of exist from. It coalesces around spiritual and emotional comforts about the sense of self and the place of women and women as beings, not just as humans.
Feminism is a cancer. It will not stop until it has it all, and then when it has it all, too many people will have invested too much of their lives to simply bring it to a halt, as you are an example of. So it will continue to invent new problems and new justifications for even more control than it already has over your thoughts, your speech, your actions, and your livelihoods.
It invents new problems. How about that? So when he's laying out here that we get these grotesque and sometimes comical hashtags lambasting the ideas of women being somehow an underprivileged or underclassed in the United States or the West in general, that these are not because of honest injustices which are taking place. It's instead because some particular researcher got some chunk of money in order to continue to get that chunk of money again to continue his or her research. They have to say that there's a problem. And the only way you can get that problem to be viewed as real is to have victims talk about that problem. Well, you put some garbage research out there, and then a bunch of people start tweeting about it, proclaiming their own experiences, and then you can turn around and say, look at this response, there's a justification for us continuing this. And the only way you can have more people doing that is by continuing it over and over again, this cycle of producing bad research which says there's a problem or a degree of oppression taking place, terribly affecting women, and that you have to continue to research and bring awareness to. It doesn't matter if we're talking about academia or organizations like NOW, which continue to perpetuate the false statistics of rape, the false statistics of the wage gap, although even NOW has backed away with proclaiming the wage gap is in essence, they said, well, there may be a difference. You cannot say that it is simply due to sexism. But the invention of new problems to justify the continued presence of feminism is not very good. And it's, in fact, a direct stab to the very core of her argument, saying that, yes, it's good for the world because there's still inequalities out there. Well, if most of the inequalities are bogus, then you're just inventing shit to stay around, where you're allowing you to do the easy work.
And it will all have been done for a good cause. I'll finish on this quote from C.S. Lewis. Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than to live under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity at some point may be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell of earth. This very kindness stings with the intolerable insult, to be cured against one's will. And cured of states that we may not regard as diseases is to be put on a level with those who have not reached the age of reason, or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. This is feminism's literal end point. It's a bad thing for the world. End of story.
Yay! Big round of applause for our participants here. Well, how about that for a fun little quote to end things off here? It's prescient. It's important. It's good to look at. If you believe everything you're doing is born from good intentions, then you have the justification of your conscience to continue to do it, you will engage in that practice. If you're lying about your research because you're thinking that it's bringing awareness to a particular issue, you'll continue to lie about your research because the ends justify the means. No one should ever allow the ends to justify the means. The means of themselves should be justification. If you cannot justify your means in of themselves, then chances are you're not engaged in a moral practice. Overwhelming. You're probably not engaged in a moral practice. There's obvious fantastic examples that will come out of the Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy. It covers a lot of the major issues. For example, the bombing of Hiroshima is in there. But that's a whole other debate to engage in. The literal endpoint of feminism, he is spot on with that point. How is it the literal endpoint of feminism? Well, it's making problems up in order to perpetuate a financial industry of individuals who have invested their time to gain an education in this field and have now realized that that education is not able to properly point out and resolve issues. Either because by resolving the issues, it loses its standing and because it's no longer needed, or because it's too incompetent to even identify an issue appropriately. A great example of what an organization ought to look like is, and forgive me, I don't recall its exact name, but the organization that turned itself into a federal campaign for the legalization of gay marriage. It was originally brought about as a legal paper written by a student getting his JD, in essence saying that there's no constitutional justification to prevent same-sex marriage. He pushed this and got a lot of traction and got some people on board, and his office grew as donations came in and more people joined with their goal of legalizing same-sex marriage across this nation. When they had achieved that point, he dissolved the foundation. Just, we're done. The very day after it was announced, he dissolved the foundation because he realized that the goal in mind was to bring about same-sex marriage. And once you've achieved that, that ideology, having achieved victory, served no continued purpose. And in fact, to leave it around only perpetuates its need to survive. You have a staff to pay. You have a building for upkeep. Well, you need an issue to bring money in. No issue, no money. No money, no staff. So you can go out honorably, or like feminism has been trying to do for the better part of a decade now, after almost every corner feminist issue in Western society has been resolved, fight for insignificant problems like the AC being too cold in an office building, or point out that a particular act taken by a legislator in some ass-backwards part of the United States is going to harm women's abortion rights. One thing that Justice Scalia, despite being a strong conservative, pointed out to people who are very pro-abortion was, if you want abortion to be legal, then you must set the laws and regulations in plain, clear, legal English to ensure that with the presence of that law, with a strong majority vote, protects indefinitely the right to access of abortions. If you fail to write a good law, and it's repealed, and you try to appeal such an action, there was no legal justification to prevent that state action. So it's up to feminists to continue to bring awareness, I guess, and to, instead of only performing awareness, to engage in deep, deep, deep policy craft and political activism to bring that change about, to ensure that women have the right to abortion protected for the duration of this nation. That, though, was our debate. Christy Winters taking on Sargon of Akkad, is feminism good for the world? Sargon saying no, Ms. Winters saying yes. Ms. Winters' argument, in summary, was how women throughout time have been harmed by society. And with the advent of feminism, we have seen the change of women from being second-class citizens to going through and becoming equal citizens within our nation, our Western nations. But feminism still has more work to do because there's other nations out there which require our help. Not only have feminists helped women out, the byproduct of bringing awareness to the particular issues affecting women have also given an opportunity for men to speak and talk about their victimization. And by bringing up their personal victimization, they have been able to change laws, feminists that is, have been able to change laws to include men as being victims of other crimes otherwise traditionally viewed to be victims that are crimes that could only be committed against women. What she fails to be able to prove is that by bringing awareness to such points, by existing and saying that there's a problem, look at there's a problem over there, that there's actual legitimate, smart, thoughtful policy in place to tackle those problems. Nor does she provide an argument that succinctly shows that feminism is the only ideology which will provide the adequate machinery, movement, and capital in order to bring about those policy changes. Sargon capitalizes on this and focuses first on how feminism as an enterprise bases itself off of some very faulty science. In fact, science so faulty and unrepeatable that it brings into question the entire enterprise's claims of oppression anywhere. And by operating in these cloistered environments and echo chambers, it only perpetuates the production of these bad studies. Women do not benefit from this in any way whatsoever, and because women fail to benefit from the acts of feminism, then it's very difficult to say whether or not feminism is actually good for women or the world in general. Not only that, Sargon actually uses some very good examples of the wage gap and the 1 in 5 myths that exist, showing very clearly this trend between using bad data to justify sweeping political changes on the point. Yes, Title IX cases have gone up because of feminist activism, but that feminist activism did not come from the fact that there was an overwhelming epidemic on college campuses of sexual assault. No, it came from the idea that if women feel scared to go to class because of the 1 in 5 kind of statistic that exists for women, that the campus event effectively becomes a hostile place for them, and it denies them access to their education. Both are very, curious points to be taken. Flipping through my papers here to ensure that I've got everything kind of covered. So I would feel kind of bad at this point here to have gone this far and not properly clear it all off. Forgive this bit of radio silence here as I am flipping through. All right, Sargon then follows up by showing out that not only is academia broken in producing bad studies and that the policies that come from it are terrible, he adds that most of the people involved are pathologically entitled, that the invention of new problems which center not around widespread empirically observed issues women face on a daily basis, but instead by the inconvenience suffered by a few or even one woman that then justifies a crusade against men in general. Winters attempts to counter this, but fails, pointing out that he is not citing any sources, despite the fact that he is, and that because he's not talking about these particular issues, he's not qualified to talk on any matter. That's the blind spot argument. And instead of actually being a reasonable person, she tries to say that because he lacks credentials, he's not actually allowed to talk in this environment. Do you remember how Muslim students prevented Ayan Hirsi Ali from talking about Islam because she didn't have a proper PhD in Islamic studies? That's very much the same regressive mindset that prevents honest discussion. No, you're not part of my particular level of intelligence because I am superior to you. That doesn't work very well. Sargon continues his drive to success by pointing out that feminism has brought fantastic things to women in the West, but that's all it has done. We have not seen that effort in the East. And not only have we not seen that effort outside of the West, it's very clearly shown that women in the West are too busy focusing on their own invented problems rather than the issues abound. He cites population statistics that show that women in the most oppressed countries, specifically Islamic ones, the population is actually significantly less by proportion, as low as 24% in the United Arab Emirates. If women need feminism outside of the United States, why is the effort in academia not driven towards dismantling the patriarchal systems which are exhibited by Islamic tradition? They are not. That's not happening. Sargon lands in his final rebuttal fantastic point after point after point showing how intersectionality is actually the driving methodology behind modern feminism, and how that very fact alone has spawned out some ridiculous ideologies that are children of the feminist ideology, showing that in essence anyone can be oppressed at any time. Ms. Winters attempts to say in a very creationist-like manner that she has done the research. Climate change is not a thing. And because Sargon is not a social scientist himself, because he hasn't done real research, because he hasn't published, he in essence has no way of understanding what good social science looks like. But throughout her entire argument, it's always how feminism has helped women. Long pause, how it's helped men. Men are continual afterthought to feminism. I wish Sargon would have mentioned it, but he didn't. Sargon finally closes out by showing that throughout Winters' efforts, it was a nebulous effort at best. Loose, non-specific examples of how feminism has made a difference in the world outside, especially the West. He wasn't up to debating the fact that feminists did make good changes in the West. That's a silly thing to debate. That's known history. Instead, how will it forge ahead in the future? He focused entirely on the likelihood that feminism is done, its literal endpoint, because its future is bleak. If you've resolved all your problems and you're still hanging around, then all you do is suck up money without producing anything, and eventually people will catch on. I would say, concluding this debate, if I were to be a moderator who would have judged this debate, I would give Sargon the win. Not because I am partial to this and therefore biased, but I think that he did a better job eventually of landing better blows against his opponent's central argument. And in fact, every attempt that Ms. Winters did to target Sargon's argument came down to either ad hominem attacks or appeals to authority. A debate requires each side to present evidence and then dismantle the opponent's evidence. Both sides presented evidence. Good. Sargon attacked the very central core of Miss Winters' position. Miss Winters attacked Sargon as a person. Therefore, I have to conclude Sargon won the debate, and I think he deserves a hearty congratulations. My original assessment was that he didn't do as well as he should have. I think now, after a thorough looking over, it's fair to say that he did win the debate. However, he has much room for improvement. Miss Winters ultimately could have been dispatched with the available 25 minutes of talking time in about 7. She did a very poor job. Very poor job of presenting evidence that was substantial, and did an abysmal job of attacking the essential arguments of Sargon. I'm going to close here. I think that this has been a great exercise in demonstrating to people how a debate can go, particular points within the feminist debate, and how to dismantle those points, and how to maintain good composure and focus when dismantling, attacking, even or presenting and building up your own points. There's a lot to go over, and we will always suffer from large blind spots when there is as wide of an issue as feminism has presented itself to be now, an ever expanding creep of minor inconveniences labeled oppressions, whether we're talking about the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, or if feminists actually are willing to reach out a little bit further with a disgusted look on their face and touch areas like Indonesia and the United Arab Emirates and the Congo. I guess my final thought I'm going to put forward in a very Jerry Springer kind of way is, the only way we can actually ensure that good ideas persist and bad ideas die is to enter debate. Sargon has done a very good job attempting to do this. While he could have done better, he was putting his ideas out there. Not only is he putting his ideas out there, recall back to the very opening of this debate, the introduction. Miss Winters is a PhD, blah, 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 blah. Endless. Sargon of Akkad is a YouTuber, guy with a YouTube channel. the guy with the YouTube channel did a better job in this debate than the PhD. That's not a good sign for the quality of the ideology. And by engaging these PhDs and dismantling their arguments, we have an advantage or an opportunity to see the failings of it. And it gives us a chance to, when we see policy trying to be implemented by feminists, to judge it slightly more harshly, because we have a sense from this research, from these debates, that a feminist policy will very likely be unable to solve the extent of the problems at play. Frequently they'll focus on helping women, and as an afterthought, men will benefit. I conclude. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you found this informative and enjoyable, if not even slightly entertaining. I will do my best to seek out other debates not involving Sargon and do fight breakdowns in those cases. If you have any particulars that you'd like me to do, please bring them my way. A debate with Hitchens would probably be a bad example, because I would just sit there gawking at his magnificence as he makes almost no errors, unlike what we saw in this particular example. Have a good day.